Perfect.
All right, we're good to go. So I welcome you first speaker to the event.
This morning at breakfast, Luke told us off for being on our phones and that we should socialise more. He did so while also being on his phone. That doesn't mean it wasn't good advice that we should listen to, because he was texting Ned and that was important. But what we did is we disregarded it and probably didn't make some amazing friends that we could have. I think when hypocrisy isn't stigmatised, we probably could have had those amazing outcomes that we only get on our side. Few things in the speech. Firstly, on setup, then 2 points on judging personal circumstances and on people receiving advice. Firstly, on setup, what do we think stigmatisation looks like in the status quo? We think it firstly looks like looking down on others, such as like regarding hypocrisy as like a major character flaw and something that is like labelled to others like that person's a hypocrite. It's a label that sticks. We also think it's like used as a way to like attack others, like that person's a hypocrite, you shouldn't listen to them, they're just a bit dumb. Okay, firstly on judging personal circumstances. I think the context here is that like literally everyone is flawed, right? You could always be a better friend. You could always eat healthier. I think the key thing here is why won't these flaws change with labels of hypocrisy? I think the first thing to say is there are massive incentives to do so in the status quo, right? People want to be healthier, to feel better, and to run more, to be able to just like feel in a better mood. Secondly, I think people want to be a better friend because you care about your friends, right? You want them to like have someone that they feel like nice chatting to, and all because you're like someone that cares about them. Secondly, like these things are often really unchangeable, right? Like a person with an eating disorder isn't able to magically eat healthier, right? And someone who's neurodiverse can't like magically, have a better level of understanding that's going to make them a better friend. Those means that hypocrisy won't change it. But why do people feel judged under hypocrisy? I think the first thing to say is that hypocrisy is seen as quite a malicious thing to do, right? People feel like they're a mean person, someone that's being aggressive towards others when they're seen as a hypocrite. I think this leads to like a massive low sense of worth, right? Because it makes people think, am I a bad person? Am I being malicious? I think the thing to note here is that it's often like the most vulnerable people that are called out for this, right? Like people with eating disorders, they're called out for like telling, encouraging their friend to eat healthier. So like these kind of levels of low self-worth are likely to be most damaging to these kind of actors. I think this means to like with people with, at a small scale, this looks like someone, feeling less comfortable talking to their friends, feeling like less comfortable with themselves, but in a big in a bigger scale, looks like a mental health spiral about their self-worth. I think the second thing to say here is that, for why people feel judged, is that people are perceived as in denial when they give hypocritical advice. Because a plus-size person encouraging others to, do enjoyable exercise, people think that they don't know what their size is, right? Which I think means that when people ridicule this person for being a hypocrite, it's seen as deserved because this person seems like they are, delusional. I think this means that, they are now picked on for their worst flaws and society deems it as justified insofar that they're not the world's perfect person. Thirdly, I think people are just seen as people are, judged for, the significance of their impact, right? This looks like celebs who had spoken out about Palestine, who'd, made significant impacts on advocating for it, who are now judged for giving $100,000 instead of $1 million. I think that insofar that you're judged, celebs would feel like they can't do anything at all. That it's better to remain silent and do nothing than feel judged for not giving a significant of an impact. Right? This looks like Lizzo, who encouraged her fans to donate and was deemed as a hypocrite for being really rich when she literally paid for a family to be evacuated from Gaza. I think the outcomes here, firstly, on the lower end, is that people just highlight others' flaws more, right? You feel like your opinion doesn't matter because of who you are, because of your unchangeable character flaws. But I think secondly, you just don't take stances on important social issues, right? I had McDonald's, which is being boycotted for Palestine last night for dinner, but I'm still able to advocate for important human rights violations in there. Thirdly, on like the higher end though, like governments can now be like held more accountable by the opposition, right? Because Labor's being roasted in Parliament in the moment for the fact they're calling National out for their like irresponsible spending on giving tax cuts to landlords who don't need them. On our side, Labor can like still hold that stance while maybe having done irresponsible spending themselves. The importance here is that insofar everyone has these character flaws, this is a point which literally affects everyone in this debate. On to the second point about people receiving advice, but before then I'll take a POI.
How do people change?
How do people change? I think people change by like receiving advice from others, which is a great lead on to my second point. With the context here, is I think other opinions are really helpful, right? Like you think your family and friends like opinions are really helpful and are really motivating to like how you can become a better person. Why do we think we get better advice on our side of the house? Firstly, because it's just based on what is going to get the best outcomes for the person. You as a judge might do 4-minute 30 replies, but when you give me advice that I should stick to 4 minutes, like you're giving me the best advice for my speech compared to like on their side where you're deemed as like a hypocrite. You know it's the best thing for me, but like your character flaw doesn't hold you back. You also just don't have to justify how you're in different circumstances to me as a university debater, so therefore a 4-minute 30 reply is probably quite justified. But secondly, we think people just give more advice, right? Because they don't feel like they have to tiptoe around it. They don't have to have a risk of like swift condemnation for the fact that they're giving advice as like not the perfect person. There was only one Jesus. I don't think he's in this room. The third thing to say is I think that discussion is now focused on the advice, because I think the massive discussion and discourse around like is a person giving advice they're following literally distracts from the advice that's given, the helpful effects that it would have. So I think the comparative here, right, is that on our side, on their side of the house, they have lesser advice. They have people who feel more hesitant to give the advice. That's really important because insofar that with outcomes, you might want to become a better person, right? You might, on their side, you might have people that study less because their friends didn't encourage them to, study for their annoying maths test more. They might be less active because they, didn't feel like they should go for the run. They might be less kind to their friends because the person didn't feel like they could say, hey, you should do blah blah blah. I think this also sets I also just think in terms of what this advice looks like, the key thing here to note is that friends know what advice can change people's characteristics, right? They're not going, as a friend, you're not going to give advice to your friend with an eating disorder that they should just eat healthier. The advice we get under our side of the house is about characteristics that can change. You don't get that on their side when it's focused on things that are unchangeable through hypocrisy. I also think on the higher level, this just sets the norm that advice isn't given in our society because no one is perfect. So insofar that people, can always be better in every aspect. I think that this means that people are less and less comfortable to give it over time, and it just doesn't happen. That really boosts all of our harms. The important thing here is that this is likely to have a snowball effect over time, right? Because not, studying for a test once, doesn't have a massive effect, but when this happens more and more over time, that literally can change whether or not you could get a degree. It can, completely change whether you're friends because they, you might be more kind to them. I think for all those reasons, we get people who are now judging others less and becoming better people. That's definitely something you should support in this debate.
The way our side's going to win this debate is by proving that people will tune out of criticism when they are overloaded with it. I'll start with some rebuttal, but note that most of it will be integrated to my speech, before going into some framing and then touching on my first point on relational harms and my second point about how this will change social movements. So to start with some minor rebuttal, there's discussion about how everyone can improve. People want to be healthier. Yeah, people do want to improve, but I want to go to the gym, but I'm not going to go to the gym because it's really hard, right? People don't want to change when it's really hard to do, which it generally is. It's very hard for me to go to the gym because it takes a lot of time, effort, and energy, right? So we think that people generally don't want to change. Note, this will also be in my framing. And on the topic of people attacking people with neurodiversities and stuff, we think that this is far less likely because you don't want to be seen as attacking someone who is already heavily disprivileged in society, right? You don't want to be seen as an incredibly bad person when you attack someone like that for something that they cannot control, right? You're going to be more understanding there, right? The rest of my rebuttal I'll note when it's integrated, right? So to start with, what does the status quo look like, which we stand for? We think that hypocrites get called out because it's so stigmatized, it seems bad, as they talked about, right? So that means people will avoid being hypocritical by A, changing their own behaviors, practice what you preach, or B, they just won't call it out if they practice that very same behavior. And we think that, as I've said before, people don't like to change because it's hard, so they need a push for that change, right? And that comes from being called out. But being called out can also achieve the opposite of what you want. And we think that people like calling others out because it makes you feel like a moral, upstanding person. You're better than them when you call them out on bad behaviors, right? So you like to have that feeling of moral high ground. So to touch on my point on relational harms, right? First of all, we think criticism becomes worse. And note that this rebuts your point about getting better criticism because people aren't accountable when they're not called out for hypocrisy. They don't actually have to think about their criticism. There's less thought going into it because they don't need to think, am I being hypocritical? They don't need to think about justifying it as they said, right? So they can skip that step. They can just call people out straight out the bat, right? So it means that you're not thinking more deeply about your criticism. It's worse quality. We think that, second of all, there's more criticism because more people can call you out for stuff when they're less scared of getting called out themselves for hypocrisy, right? And third of all, no, this is also more integrated rebuttal. We think that this comes from worse places. It means that your local chain smoker is not afraid of calling you out on smoking, right? Strangers will not be afraid of being hypocritical. So you're more likely to criticize someone you don't know. And we think that's far less valuable than people close to you doing it once or twice, which relates to your point about it'll be the people that are close to you, like the judges telling you, right? So to get to the impacting here, right? It means you're getting flooded with this deluge of criticism in their world, right? It means that all of these strangers are just calling you out because they're not afraid of being called out themselves for hypocrisy. And first of all, that makes you feel horrible. You're constantly getting called out, talked down upon by others. They constantly complain about you. It means that you're going to isolate yourself. You don't want to engage with your community, right? But second of all, we think that you're unlikely to change because of all of this criticism, you don't have the energy to sift through all of these complaints when there's 40 different complaints about you all piled up. And that compounds with the fact you're already feeling worse about yourself. You have even less mental energy to sift through these complaints. So what do? You're going to take the easy out because you don't like doing that hard work, right? You're going to simply tune out all of this criticism. You're not going to listen to it. You're not going to think about it, right? The comparative here, in our world, with less criticism, you have to sift through less criticism overall. You have to think about less pieces of criticism, which means each piece of criticism seems far more important by way of a relative value. You have relatively less criticism, so each piece of it is more important. And since there's less about yourself being called out, it's easier to action change when you need to do less, right? Like instead of me having to go to the gym, changing all of my eating habits, getting on the computer a bit less, and maybe going outside a bit more. Now I just have to go outside a bit more. That's a lot more doable than 4 different things. It's just one, which means I can actually take steps towards this change rather than it seeming insurmountable and something that I can just never overcome, right? And we think it's actually going to come from people who care about you more. It's not going to come from the local chain smoker down the street who you barely talk to. It's going to come from your friends and family. Because they know they're not being hypocritical, right? We think that when it comes from these people, you're far more likely to take it into account because these people really matter to you, right? These are the people that you really want to consider, And you should weigh this highly because this will affect a lot of people, right, as they've stated, because every single person is now getting called out for all of these different things, right? So it's going to worsen a lot of people's lives overall. I'll take a point now if you have one.
Are you a hypocrite?
I don't see how that's relevant to this debate. I'm sure you can explain that in your own speech, however. So let's move on to social movements, right? And this is some more integrated rebuttal, right? So they talk about how celebrities, they get called out even when they take action. But first of all, I think, no, if they take action, they're not going to get called out for hypocrisy because they're taking action. By definition, they're not being a hypocrite. By definition, they're doing something good about it. We think that celebrities only get called out when they're being hypocrites. And on their side, you can't pressure celebrities into changing their behavior, first of all, because they can't be accused of hypocrisy. They don't... which means, think about the environmental movement, right? Celebrities, they can endorse the environmental movement all they want, but they don't actually have to take action to do anything, right? It means that they can just get on their private jet as much as they want and actually cause more emissions than a lot of their fans day to day. And they don't have to change, they don't get called out upon it for hypocrisy.
On
It's
that point-
just accepted, right? And it means that they also don't endorse movements to their fans. We're not called out about things when they mention that their climate is really bad, but they don't change. They're less likely to endorse movements as well, which means you get less buy-in on a community level. Second of all, when people tune out to criticism, as I proved earlier, that means that change movements have less tools to create engagement because when they criticize someone, people already have so much criticism stacked up on top of itself that they just can't listen to the things that these movements want to get out to these people. They've already got to listen to so much, so these movements that take even more mental energy, they just don't want to tune into.
On that
And
point-
third, we think buy-in becomes less meaningful because people don't need to change their behavior to criticize. For example, you don't need to bike to work in order to criticize other people who drive. You don't have to criticize the person that litters. You don't need to stop littering to criticize people that litter, right? So this means that you get less buy-in to these change movements, right? Because people can just say they stand for it, but not actually change anything, right? So you're less likely to care in general. You get less celebrities endorsing these movements, but you also get these celebrities doing less when they do, right? So that means that they're unlikely to change their behaviors. And these are people with lots of resources. So these are the people that need to change their behaviors because they create so much more emissions, for example, than other people. And finally, we think that people think the job is done when they see all these people talking out about climate change, even though they're not actually changing their behavior. It's like the bystander effect. You see everyone else talking about it. Obviously it's fixed because all these people are complaining about it. Why should I change my behavior? So at the end of this, we see that on their side, this criticism is actually lower value, it's worse, and that the movements that rely on criticism to get people's attention, to make them change, do not actually have the tools to do it anymore. Thank you.
And invite the assistant speaker for your further please.
I think the only hypocrites in this room is the negating team when they tell you that everyone here is going to be perfect and doesn't want change and doesn't want to be motivated for change and encouragement isn't worthwhile and doesn't help anyone, right? This is just simply not true. We brought you so much material here at SAM that they didn't engage with on why people actually do work from encouragement. Two things to do in this speech. Firstly, just walk through, answer two questions, which side people feel less judged on for giving advice. Secondly, then, can people actually take this advice on board, Right then. Firstly, on like feeling judged, note at the top of this point, this was like where we brought out our strongest material at Sam, right? We told you when people feel less judged to be able to give advice, they're like more likely to give more advice. And their only response here is that like this is just gonna mean like the average Joe on the street who's like a smoker is telling someone to like who's walking by to stop smoke that's like smoking, right? This is just really not good enough, because I think the person walking down the street that's still smoking is able to recognize that actually that's like just someone that's not meaningful in their life, someone that hasn't really like doesn't understand their situation and able to like put that past them. I think that wasn't good enough. But we also tell you here that like we bring you so much material, how like everyone, like there's like a recognition that everyone's fault, and what we uniquely provide here is that we provide like loved ones with the avenue to like feel like they're able to like give advice to their friends without feeling judged. What does this look like in like a scenario then? This looks like in a school, someone like giving advice to their friend, or maybe like studying a bit more for a test that's coming up, even though they haven't been able to because they've been like preoccupied with like a tournament they're at or like a sports thing. And like instead someone calls them out for like their for being hypocritical. On our side, the person's able to recognize that actually, because this is not stigmatized, that actually that's for their best value. They want the best interest for them, and therefore they're like, actually I'm going to take this on board. What happens on their side then is that like people think this is like a really stigmatized thing, because hypocrisy is just like seen as a very negative negative and malicious act. We think this person's like more likely to not take this on board because others around them are like calling them out for being a hypocrite. When people aren't calling them out for being a hypocrite, they're like, actually we might take that advice on board. What this means then is that we actually have people feeling less judged to be able to give out good advice. This is so important then, because what this means is that we're actually going to be able to help people more to feel empowered to like make changes like in their daily lives, even if it is like really small things, like going for like another walk, or like maybe going for like another like eating a bit healthier, right? I think this is like real, like debate winning material here, because when people don't feel judged and like aren't seen as malicious, there's not going to be this like low sense of worth of like being able to give advice, even if you are like maybe like a plus size person giving advice, because they understand like you're not like judged for your circumstance, because people just like it's not a stigmatized thing. We can just like relate to other things in society. Right then, moving on to like the second point, like where like can people take this advice on board? I think this was like a lot of where negating's case kind of stands, because they kind of just like claimed that there's going to be like people just won't be held accountable anymore, and so people aren't going to be like taking this advice on board. Right, two responses here. I think people only give advice to those they care about, right? Like the average Joe on the street isn't really just like shouting out advice to someone. That's just not happening. That was like very unrealistic for them to claim. I think people who generally are giving advice have an incentive for them to do well, and if they're like doing it in like a bad manner, I think people have like that rationalization to recognize that people aren't dumb enough to like take off on really bad advice because they recognize it's bad for them. They don't want that bad outcome for themselves. They're not going to take on that advice. What we uniquely do, as I told you, is we empower people to have like good advice to take on that good advice. Secondly, then we see like people I told you, only take on the advice from those they see how like understand their situation. So like what this means is you're not going to take on advice from like a smoker who hasn't gone through like years of like smoking and like dealt with all like the repercussions of it. But you're going to take advice from someone who has gone through it and like has faced like that same situation, because they understand what you're going through, and they can uniquely provide you with advice that the others can't. Right then, they said like the second claim was that people want to do it because that like they have this like general like moral high ground and that's really harmful. This just concedes like the judgy nature of hypocrisy. What we do is we actually like take this down, because when it's not stigmatized, it's not as judged, you're not seen as malicious, your advice is actually just seen as like a more positive thing as well. Right then, they said there's way too much advice. I've already kind of dealt with that, like strangers can't be bothered like just like shouting out things to everyone. Right then, next thing, they said like people will just like stop like being hypocritical and stuff, like if they like being called out, and like that people just like aren't incentivized to do change. Two responses. Firstly, censorship. This just doesn't happen in the status quo. People are still called hypocrites and continue to do what they're doing. What this means is like if someone's bullying someone and like is called like a hypocrite for like still bullying them, I think they're still gonna like their friend is they're just not gonna stop because of that. That's just not like something that's gonna change them. What we do then is we actually provide like that friend to be like genuine advice. Okay, and then secondly, we think that even if this is true and you don't believe that, what we do is that we actually give them like a way to like improve themselves. This is not something that negating can do, because when they like constantly have like a stigmatized like sense of hypocrisy. People feel uncomfortable as they're labelled as malicious, judgy, and like looked down upon. What this means is that we get more feedback, and people aren't scared to give feedback because people feel more empowered to implement it and just like listen to it because it's not like a personal attack on them because of like those understand the situation then. Right, at the end of this, what I've proven is that people will actually, like there will be, the criticism will be taken on like board, like at a small scale, like Sam told you, this is just looking like a person like studying a bit more because they recognise it's for like a good thing. But on a large scale, this is like looking at like people no longer like attacking Labour and like in Parliament for like constantly like talking about the smoking laws because like they failed like 3 waters, right? Okay, I'll take your point.
Who has more incentive to change when being hypocritical? Someone who gets called out for not recycling when they speak about the environment, or someone who doesn't?
Well, I think that's kind of just like not really that important because I think when like on either side you're going to be called out for like not being recyclable, and I think on our side when someone tells you that like who knows you because we told you here that like the person who knows you is more likely to do it when it's not a stigmatized thing because they're the one that care about you, they think then you're more likely to take it on. Right then, they secondly just told you that like people will like less have less criticism and that this is like a response here is it's just more likely to stay silent, like people are more likely to stay silent on their side than not say anything like the people care about them because they're feared by like their bystanders to be judged. They literally conceded this at first. They said like how people would rather just like the celebrities would rather just like stay silent and like not do anything, but we tell you here that just the power of like even like Lizzo just saying to donate is still so important. We think that we uniquely provide this because celebrities etc don't want to be judged on like a national stage and like they don't want their image to be ruined, and I think what we do is we at least get something across the line. They aren't able to get anything across the line because they have this massive stigmatization which impacts their whole career, all their brand deals etc, and they don't want to like associate themselves with one side, but when it's not stigmatized they actually are able to speak out. So at the end of this, I think what Canterbury proves to you is that firstly that we are able to get better, like less judging in terms of like personal circumstances for like when people are giving advice, but secondly people are more likely to take the advice on board because they recognise that this criticism is coming from like a good place just because it isn't seen as a malicious act as it would be on Kahurangi-Malborough's side. I think that is why we have won this debate.
I thank the speaker for his speech and I invite the speaker to his speech.
In today's debate, it is clearly our side which models positive change, shows you role models, and gets better criticism. It is clear then at this point that for Canterbury to get this modelling of good change, they need to look further north than Springs Junction, come to Whakatu Nelson for a while. Okay, in today's speech, I'm going to be doing some rebuttal, I'll be doing some meta, and then I'm going to be doing some small substantives about whipping, relational harm, social movements, and moving on to how we actually create change, because that's what we're both trying to do. So, rebuttal. What they said is the first thing to note is that the hypocrisy, which this debate is about, we think that it's fair for this hypocrisy to become criticism. We tell you that on the harder end of that, on our side, it probably just looks like attacks, but we think criticism is a fair place for us to meet in the middle. No, on their side, this criticism became advice, which became encouragement, which became feedback. This does not look like positive encouragement. Because if I wasn't afraid of being called a hypocrite, I would probably tell the judging panel and you lot that you need to all get better at debating. The reason I don't do that is because I'm not a hypocrite and I'm afraid of being called that. That is the kind of criticism you get on your side. We don't think this creates a better world. Note that we gave you this POI about who has more incentive to create change. Is it someone who is just like a poser performatively criticizing someone about recycling and that person receives so much criticism during the day on your side? Or is it someone who actually models that change? Is it your coach who gets off the phone at breakfast? The only response here we got is that it's unimportant. We think that this is the most important point in this debate. We are going to be working on this heavily. What they said in their most recent speech is that they give people a way of changing. You don't know how to get off of your phone if your coach is always on it, and you don't know why exactly you should do that because it's clearly not important enough for your coach to get off their phone. I was there at breakfast, no one got off their phone when the coach said so. Okay, next they say that people are attacked for being hypocritical and this is a huge harm. No, they're not, because people just aren't hypocritical. When they say, oh, it's terrible that on our side, if a hypocrite says hypocritical bad criticism, they're going to be attacked. Okay, cool, we're happy to concede that because now they're not giving too much criticism. Now the only criticism in the world is actually helpful, actually positive, and actually drives good change. Okay, next on celebrities. This has been a big point of clash in the debate. Luckily, we can win on this metric because we gave you heaps of unresponded material about celebrities at Riley in terms of social movements. But let's take it on their ground, talking about Lizzo, talking about Gaza. Note that this example actually knifes their own case pretty badly because yes, Lizzo did face hypocrisy massively, but yes, Lizzo also donated to humanitarian causes. So what you've said in your very own example, right from first, is that hypocrisy fails to have harms, it fails to stop positive change. At that point, all you have to buy is any of the side effects, the harms of hypocrisy, which we tell you, and then we win the debate. What happens then, I'll ask you, in a world where Lizzo was never pressured to donate to humanitarian aid? Because she wasn't afraid of being called a hypocrite. We think this is the world, what your world looks like, and we don't think this is a world that we can stand for. Because at the end of the day, hypocrisy is another word for logical inconsistency, and that is just how you create persuasive change. So if hypocrisy is normalized, it's inherently normal and inherently okay for Lizzo to say, I love human rights, I'm a good person, and then proceed to not donate to aid. We think, therefore, that it is only on our side where Lizzo does not donate to aid. It is where Lizzo does donate to aid. We think it is only on our side where we actually get that positive change, and we think it is only on our side where we can win, therefore, at that point. Okay, now, I'm going to be talking about social movements. This characterization that we gave you, how do you actually get buy-in under the status quo? 3 things: meaningful criticism, celebrity endorsement, and thirdly, because people want to feel better than others. This is how social media infographics get spread like a virus among the networks of people, young people on Instagram. Okay, so social movements, how do they work? Firstly, we think on their side, when people just tune out to criticism, as we've proved to you, change movements have less tools to actually create engagement because now that criticism is seen as far less valuable, it's weighed far less highly. Secondly, you can't pressure celebrities into changing their behaviour because now they can't be accused of hypocrisy, right? You can't say, Lizzo, you claim to be a good person, yet you don't donate to starving families. What this means is that they don't endorse movements to their fans on their side, so there's less buy-in at a community level, and actually less donations, less altruism from the celebrities themselves. So we win on their own metric here. This was where they were hoping to win, and we beat them at it. Thirdly, buy-in becomes less meaningful because now people don't need to change their behaviour to criticise. Note that Riley told you about this. They didn't pick it up, so we gave them a POI, too little, too late response to this. You can't come back from this at the end of this point. We need you to get up and say how you actually get more meaningful buy-in when you don't have to bike to work in order to shame people. So at the end of this, let's do some meta. How do we think we're winning in this debate right now? Essentially, we both agree, this is our chain of logic. We have to say that you get more hypocrisy, which results in more criticism, advice, feedback, whatever they want to call it, we can win on it, which results into worse quality of criticism, which results in less valued sources of that criticism, which results into just people tuning out of the criticism. Okay, so where we agree in this chain of logic is that there is more hypocrisy. We both agree that there is more criticism as a result of that, but where the two teams diverge is we say when there's far more criticism, that naturally has to come from sources that you aren't going to value, right? I'm not going to care as much about a stranger on Lambton Quay yelling at me as I walk to Rutherford House this morning as I am about a coach that I've had and I trust telling me how to do debating better. So what they've said in this, they've just asserted that it doesn't get worse quality criticism and even ambitiously tried to say they get better quality criticism. We've clearly mechanised how this isn't true, so at that point we are winning. We also tell you, to continue down our chain, people are just going to, when it's worse quality, comes from less valued sources, happens all the time, you're just faced with a barrage of attacks, so people are going to tune out. Note that was a bit of substantive from me, right? That was my new framing, new meta for this debate. We prove how they get more criticism, we prove how they get worse, harsher criticism, we prove how the criticism comes from less valuable places, and at the end of that, we think it's just entirely reasonable to assume that that criticism isn't going to be considered, people are just going to tune out. Now, I'll take some criticism.
Can a paraplegic bike to work?
No. All right. So, how is change made? Note that this is, again, like part of my substantive push. Note this happens behaviourally at the relational level, and note that this also happens at the political level, like the environmental movement, like the workers' rights movement. Okay, we flagged in a POI and throughout Riley's speech, like, how is change made? They said it's advice and it's criticism. So how do you get better criticism, and which side gets it better? For criticism, it needs to be valued highly. We tell you it needs to be good quality, it needs to be infrequent so you actually listen when it happens, it needs to be from people you care about, and it needs to be justified. Also, it needs to be done in practice, because if your coach is on your phone, you don't think it's that important to not be on your phone, and you also don't know how easy it is to not be on your phone. You're just going to stay on your phone. You did. Okay, this can never happen in their world, all these forms of good criticism, good advice, because they are all contingent on not being hypocritical. The second way that we actually create change is through self-reflection. Firstly, you're less likely to self-reflect if you feel attacked 24/7. You think, well, I'm obviously a good, you think, you kind of have a false sense of security. There's no incentive to change if you're always being yelled at, right? Secondly, you're less likely to self-reflect on the right things if the helpful criticism, the one nugget of good debate training advice, is mixed in with thousands of unhelpful digs, poor quality POIs, right? So at the end of this, they cannot get better change, they cannot claim the benefits, and even at that point, if you buy just one of the side effects of hypocrisy, we have to win. Thank you.
Thank you for the speech, and I invite Lisa to come and speak at
Every single person in this room has at some point, or still is, probably a hypocrite. I think both teams have agreed on this. Our coaches are hypocrites when they sit at breakfast on their phones. The panel will give us feedback saying, oh, be more confident, when they're probably trembling giving an OA at a national tournament. I'm a hypocrite for telling my teammates to take a POI while I'll probably ignore a POI 10 times during this tournament. The negating team is encouraging the majority of people to be looked down on and prevented from speaking their mind just because it's not always going to be 100% politically correct or perfect, instead of supporting all of these good people just trying their best to help the people they care about and give them good advice that is relatable. These people are just labelled as hypocrites. This is really bad. So what do I need to do in my speech today to further our margin of winning the debate? I think what I need to do in my speech to win is basically just prove to you that this good positive feedback happens more on our side because it's not stigmatised, and explain to you really clearly why hypocrisy being stigmatised makes people afraid to share this feedback. No, thank you. So 2 areas of clash I'm going to address. The first is on the area of judgment. Why do people feel judged giving advice? Why do they feel judged receiving it? And then secondly on what does this hypocrisy look like? Does it create change? And if so, which side gets this change better? Firstly, no thank you, on feeling judgment on both sides. I'd like to note here, Sam brings you so much debate-winning material about why this judgment is so bad and why it happens so frequently. This goes hugely unresponded to at a lower level. They talk to you heaps about celebrities and climate change movement. No thank you. But we give you so many examples at Sam about a lower level thing where people feel judged going to the gym, people feel judged not doing their homework. All of these really great examples. We weigh this super, super highly because these are incidents that happen all the time on a global scale. They happen to lots of people in all different areas of life. And we care about this way more, people having a mental health spiral, feeling really bad about themselves when their advice isn't taken, than someone just not having the energy to go for a run. That's not what we care about. So firstly, what do they tell you under this? They talk to you, they react to our stuff about celebrities quite well, right? They bring you a lot of responses to our material about celebrities and social movements. What they say here is that they say, if these celebrities are taking action, they're not going to be called hypocrites, right? Celebrities only get called out when they are hypocrites. I just don't think that this is true whatsoever, because firstly, celebrities get called out all the time for random stuff, because the media loves a good story. They love to call celebrities out and put them on a really high pedestal. What does this mean? This means celebrities get called out all the time, and this means that whatever they do to support a social change movement will never be good enough. A celebrity like Taylor Swift could put millions upon millions of dollars into Palestinian rescue, and this wouldn't be enough in the eyes of like huge like left-wing people that believe she will never be doing enough because she's not like stopping the crisis. This is the kind of pedestal that these people are held to. We want these people to be empowered to speak on important issues and like be role models for the younger generations who aren't celebrities, to also empower them to speak up about these things. No thank you. So they also, under this clash of like feeling judgment and stuff, they tell you that like they kind of characterize criticism, and they tell you that it needs to come from people you know really well. It doesn't mean very much from people that you don't know very well. gives you material here about why people don't feel comfortable giving this advice when hypocrisy is stigmatized. I'm going to extend on this. The stigma means that like my coaches aren't going to give me really brutal feedback that I probably need because hypocrisy is so stigmatized. Ned isn't going to tell me to like slow down in my speeches because I'll probably turn around and be like, Ned, I've seen you speak before. You speak at like 2 times speed constantly. This means they feel really stigmatized and like they feel judged to be giving this advice. This means that I won't receive that really valuable advice that I probably need to like improve my speaking style. Note here, you only get this positive criticism when it's not stigmatized. Why? Because on their side, when it's stigmatized, this means people are so afraid to speak out because they're like going to get cancelled. They're going to get like judged by all the people around them. This also means I'm not going to take that advice on board on their side of the house because I'm like, I don't trust what they're saying. It's unreliable. And I feel like they're just being a hypocrite and I'm not going to take on that advice. That would be really useful. I'd also like to note here, we bring you heaps of material at SAM around why this advice it doesn't always come with bad intentions. Usually when people are giving advice, it's not because they want to like talk down on people, but on their side of the house, this is how it comes across. It comes across like someone giving me advice and me taking it on as like a dig at me, and I get really defensive about this. This is really bad because on our side of the house, we get advice that means these people take on advice that will make them feel really good about themselves. If Ungam comes up to me and she's like, Joni, you should go on a run, she's not telling me this because she's like thinks I'm really unfit. She's telling me this because she knows it will make me feel really good about myself. They don't get this on their side of the house. They just get this like really bad judgment and like everyone is just labelled as a hypocrite. No one gets good advice and no one feels comfortable to give good advice. So at the end of this clash, I think what I'm able to prove to you, and what we're able to prove to you with our great material at SAM, is that these feeling of judgments are so powerful, they happen all the time. This is really bad. And on their side of the house, all they get is people feeling way too uncomfortable that they're going to like get cancelled or something to ever give advice. Yes?
Yeah, is it hypocritical to attack a paraplegic for not biking to work if you wouldn't if you were a paraplegic?
I'm not really sure how that's relevant. I'm going to move on to my next area of clash, which is about like hypocrisy and like when this change happens, what side gets it a bit better. So under this clash, both sides kind of talk about hypocrisy a lot, and we talk a lot about feedback, criticism, what's the differences, and we talk a lot about how does hypocrisy lead to change and if it does. What do they tell you here? They tell you that people want to change, but they don't because it's too hard. They don't have the energy because they're like being overloaded with criticism. Firstly here, the only reason that they are being overloaded with criticism on their side of the house is because every single thing they hear is seen as like an attack on them. Whereas on our side of the house, feedback and advice is seen as a positive thing that's going to like actually help you, and you're more willing to take this on board. What does this mean? This means people are super eager to make this change, to put in the effort to like go to the gym. They know it's going to make themselves feel better about themselves. When it is stigmatized, they just think that they're being told that they're really unfit and like they're not doing what they need to like look after themselves and take care of themselves. This is really bad. We on our side can achieve a level of hypocrisy where it's like relatable, right? Like if someone, just because someone themselves is like plus size and they tell another person that's like maybe a few sizes smaller to like go to the gym, feel good about yourselves, this person doesn't feel like they're being attacked. They don't judge the person who's like a few sizes more than them. What they actually do is they take that feedback on and they feel really supported, and that person who gives the advice also feels really good about themselves. They don't feel like worthless because their advice isn't being taken on board. This is really good. What else? What other pushes do we get from the negating side? They tell you that people are going to avoid being hypocrites if it's a stigma because they know they're going to be called out. Firstly, we actually don't think this is true insofar as the people who are these hypocrites aren't going to stop doing this thing because it's a habit. They're not going to stop they're not going to start going to the gym themselves just because they've been called out. What they are going to do is stop giving advice. Why is this so harmful? This is so harmful because the people in their lives who need this advice aren't receiving it. They're not able to like improve their lives. This is really bad because that person who is giving the advice also feels really useless. We give you heaps of material at SAM that goes heavily unresponded to about why it is that people feel so worthless when their advice is not taken on board. They feel worthless because they feel like their words don't have any meaning. The people that they care about don't see themselves in the same way. They also bring you stuff here about like the Lizzo example we brought you and how like on their side they get this positive change. We tell you, as I've already emphasised, these people are put on such high pedestals, and we tell you that on our side we get this change because it's not stigmatised. People are comfortable to like make mistakes and not be perfect, because every single person in this room is not perfect, is not a hypocrite. So proud to affirm.
I hope this gives you a good speech, and I invite the service speaker from the game to the college to stand up for today's speech.
Right, are we starting in 3, 2, 1? If each of us got 100 points of feedback for every debate we did, right, what would happen then? It's all going to go over our heads. We're not going to have the capacity to actually understand why we're getting each of these pieces of feedback. We're not going to have the ability to go and make the time to change every single one of them. When are we going to be getting this type of feedback? When we're getting like an overstimulation of feedback, when people aren't scared to give advice, even though it's something that they may do themselves, even though it's something that maybe the whole world does, and it's actually very, very hard to change, but they're not going to be scared to give that advice because of the destigmatization, right? What does this look like? It means that we are getting advice on our side despite the stigma, right? We still get advice on our side of the house. It's not like in the status quo, no one is ever getting any advice and no one's ever going to the gym. This is just not the status quo. It is not what is happening. Right, so then what do we see? We see two main points of clash in this debate. Firstly, what is the type of criticism that is going to be happening? Secondly, what will the response be to this criticism? I'll start on the type of criticism. What have they tried to tell us here? Well, they've tried to tell us here that they're going to get better advice, right? But even if people don't do it personally. They've just kind of asserted this. We're going to get better advice because there's more people out there giving advice. We hope this is not true. When are you going to get better advice? When people have to justify it, right? If people have to justify what they do because maybe the person giving it to them is saying, oh, well, wait, you don't do that, why should I do it? Then that starts a conversation. It makes them go, oh, this is why you should do it. It forces them to explain it, right? Gives them time to process why they're actually getting this advice. They told us people only take advice from the people that they understand. This does not happen on their side of the house when people are able to just freely give out criticism without any backlash, without any sort of, oh, why should I do that though? When these questions are not being asked, you cannot get good advice given to you, and therefore it cannot be implemented. Secondly, on this, in response to like advice is only going to be given about things you can change. Firstly, there's no mechanism about why this is exclusive. We also get stuff about why you can change. Secondly, we think it's more likely to be things that you can realistically change when people have to change those things themselves and able to feel like they can give that advice freely to others. Or when people feel like they have to explain why you should do this. We see that this is more likely to be stuff that you can realistically change. I'll move on to this a little bit more later, and I'll flag that as well when I talk about the types of advice and the response that people will be getting to that. All right, lastly, here is that they told us that people are less likely to give advice on our side of the house. For example, no one's ever going to give you advice about studying for your test, so everyone's just going to fail every test that you do. Firstly, this is integrated in our case. Riley told you why we're actually more likely to get more advice. Secondly, we see that criticism isn't a motivator for these type of actions, right? If you're only studying for your test, if you're only going for a run, or actually taking care of your health because you're getting criticism from everyone around you, we don't see that this is actually beneficial to the person. So even if they buy all of their material, we prefer a world, right, where it's not up to criticism. It's not a negative thing that people have to do, but people actually can motivate themselves to go out and do this. We see that even if you buy all of their material here, we're still able to win on this because it makes people feel better about themselves when they know they can do this themselves. All right. Next thing here, on the type of criticism, right, they then told us that it's only going to be given by people that they care about, that on their side of the house, it's only going to be people that you care about that give you this, right? Let's talk about this. Why would people, right, only give it when they care about you, right? It's because they have an accountability, right? When people are accountable for the advice they're given, when you're being asked, oh, why are you giving me this advice? Then you're more likely to give it someone near to you because you're not afraid to have that conversation. Secondly, you're thoughtful about their response. This should be familiar to you because Riley bought you this at first and it has not been responded to on their side of the house, right? When these mechanisms are removed, they can then give criticism freely to anyone without fear, which is really bad because it means that you're going to be giving it to strangers on their side of the house. You're not going to be giving it to people close to you. And therefore, this is far, far less value to valuable to the person via their own metric, that you're only going to take advice from people close to you and people that you understand. Therefore, they're not going to be getting good advice. It's not going to be coming from people close to them, and that's not good. Finally, on this, right, about more criticism. Everyone on this debate agrees that we're probably going to be getting more criticism. Everyone pretty much has said that, right? So what does this look like? What does the likelihood look like? They told us that, well, you're going to get more criticism about going to the gym, so you're going to go to the gym more often. We see that firstly, this is really bad and also just likely not true. If you're getting lots of criticism about going to the gym, you're probably going to be not motivated to go to the gym because you feel like you can't do it, because you feel like you're not fit enough already. It's going to be a really hard place for you to fit in because it's not something you feel strongly about, right? Secondly, Finn already walked you through a lot of this about the likelihood stuff, right? But let's just kind of go over this a little bit again. We told you that it's likely to be people close to you, right? We told you that on our side of the house, you're getting advice from people close to you. You're not getting very much of it, but it's very valuable and it's really well thought through, and there are conversations about it. On their side of the house, it's not people close to you. You get lots of it. It goes over your head. You don't have time to process or think about why you are getting it or where it is coming from, right? In the status quo, kids just joke about the study sessions that they have about, oh, haha, we actually just like ate a bunch of M&Ms during our study sessions and didn't study. People don't go around calling every person a hypocrite for not studying. This just is not what happens. It is not a realistic scenario on their side of the house, and it is just not what happens. All of this advice is not seen as malicious. People are able to joke about it, and then they're able to talk about it and be like, oh, we actually probably should study, and go through why they are likely to do that, right? So then let's look at this like big picture. Even if we get worse criticism on our side of the house, right, at least people are going to be listening to it. Even if it's not the best criticism out there, people are listening to it because it's coming from somewhere close to you, and there's not so much of it that it's overwhelming you and you just feel like you can't get through any of it. On their side of the house, there's so much criticism coming, and it's a very poor quality of criticism, so people are just not going to get it. We're going to get change on our side of the house. We're going to get people listening to it, rather on their side of the house, where it will all just fall away. I'll take a POI now.
Why do people be hypocritical?
I don't think that's really relevant in this debate. We've given you a bunch of reasons why people are likely to give advice. We've already been through all that. All right, moving on. And to the second point of clash here, right? What is the response going to be to this criticism? This was kind of like a little bit talked about over here, but this was mainly talking about the type. Now we're going to talk about the actual people, right? They told us that it's going to be really vulnerable people that are going to be impacted by this, right? That people are going to be criticized for unchangeable behaviors, right? And that this is just all that's going to happen. Firstly, often people can change things that they're going to be criticized for, especially on our side of the house, when it's well thought through and probably something that you have had to do yourself in order to then give this advice. This looks like maybe environmentalism, feminism, buying a compost bin, buying a bike, not telling someone who is neurodivergent to change the way that they act, or telling someone who has an eating disorder to like eat differently. This is just not true. Secondly, we think that people in the status quo are not getting criticized. They're being accepted and understood because there are conversations about this. If they're putting themselves in this position, they then have the ability to talk about this, to be vulnerable with the person because they're probably someone close to them, rather than on their side of the house where they're not even close to them in the first place and they don't feel safe to talk about this. This means that we don't see that it's vulnerable people that are going to be harmed by this. For all of these reasons, but also because they're just not likely to put themselves in this vulnerable position in the first place. If they know all this about themselves, if they maybe think they're going to be criticised, they're unlikely to do this. We don't see why they would have an incentive to do this on their side of the house. Therefore, it's just really not that important when we don't talk about this. Also, Riley and Finn have already talked to you about stuff like, if a paraplegic can't bike to work, why are they going to be criticised for that? We don't think that's true. People don't just go around being shunned for something that they cannot do in the first place. Secondly, we tell you these people are probably maybe not going to give you advice about biking to work. Maybe they'll tell you to buy an electric car or to get a compost bin. It's not like one avenue. That's not how the world works. We're in a far more accepting world now where there's so many different avenues that you can go down to help different movements, right? We think this is hugely important. And then finally, just on celebrities here, right? Celebrities, they tell us that they get judged for not giving enough, they're never going to be doing enough, all of this sort of stuff. We show you that scrutiny is actually a really, really good thing, right? It may not have been recognised at all. For example, Lizzo's donation, maybe it didn't even come out in the media at all if no one was criticising. We see that it gives celebrities an opportunity to showcase how good they are, to put their movement out the front, even if they are being scrutinised all the time. We see this is a really, really good thing because it puts the movement out there, it shows people how much they're doing, and it gives them someone to look up to. We also think the number of people criticising Lizzo for not fixing the Middle East versus the number of people who are celebrating her for doing something towards it, right? We think the number that are criticising her is so small that it just kind of weighs out the debate when you have all of her fans who are really supporting her, following her advice to then go and donate as well, right? And we think this is just far more true, whereas on their side of the house, when no one donates at all because there's no accountability and they can just say, oh yeah, go donate, even though they don't and no one calls them out for that, we see that it's far more beneficial on our side of the house, and so we win this point as well, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I take the speaker from the speech, and as is customary, reverse the speaking order and invite the leaders of the debating team to deliver their teams online.
If the debate ends and we shake hands, cross the floor and finish up and then get 1,000 pieces of criticism from each judge, we are not going to listen to any of them. If you then walk out that room and DMG runs up to you and gives you 1,000 more pieces of criticism, you are going to fly back to Christchurch and never do debating again. Only on our side can we get meaningful change in debating. Only on our side can we get meaningful change in relationships, social movements, and at that point it's only us that can get a better world. 2 points of clash here. Firstly on the effects of hypocrisy, and secondly on change movements. So what are the effects of hypocrisy? They say, we don't want hypocrites to be attacked. We want a world with less attacking, and we want a world where people aren't afraid to speak their mind. They also said that hypocrisy stops people from giving good, valuable criticism, and so people don't change at that point. Where we intersect in this debate is the point where we say, actually, you get more criticism because now, you don't have to, now you can criticize people for stuff that you do yourself. You get worse criticism because it's coming from so many more people, and you get it from worse places because it's not coming from people you value. We mechanise this very clearly, and our mechanisation of good criticism went unresponded to throughout today's debate. We think that it's fine if hypocrites are afraid of being attacked for saying hypocritical things. Because when that happens, hypocrites don't give bad criticism, they give good criticism. They don't give it too often, they give it just often enough for it to actually be considered. And they don't give it to random strangers on the street, you give it to people who you know are going to listen to you. We are very happy to accept that, even if you buy their idea that hypocrisy is the one thing that stops people from speaking their mind and it just gets people attacked, then we are more than happy to accept our mechanisation of this and concede that because we win here. They admitted also that we're all hypocrites, right? Everyone in this room, everyone outside of this room. So what this means that on our side, when we stop hypocrites from saying hypocritical things, and when we prove why saying hypocritical things is bad, we affect a huge portion of the world, everyone, right? As both teams have conceded. So at that point, when they've conceded that we are helping everybody in the world, it is clear that we win this point of clash. Our mechanisation was stronger because it went uncontested. We crystal clearly mechanised it throughout the entire debate, and we also made it applicable to more people when we're talking about social movements, talking to how you treat your spouse, how you relate with your family, all those sorts of things. Second point of clash on change. They say people don't donate because they're afraid of backlash, and if we get rid of hypocrisy, we're going to get rid of that backlash. Note that they then gave us an example of someone who received backlash and still donated. By the time they got to third F, the only point on this was reduced to the far left is going to blame Lizzo for not single-handedly creating a Palestinian state. We think that this weighs out of the debate, but even if you don't buy that, Stella gave you great material on that. We say, without the stigma of hypocrisy, we can only then get good credit. Without the stigma of hypocrisy, there is no reason why Lizzo would donate in the first place. Because without the stigma of hypocrisy, it's normal for Lizzo to say, I'm a good person, I didn't donate to humanitarian efforts. Yes, that's hypocritical. It's not stigmatized. At that point, only in our world do we get celebrity donations. Only in our world do we get buy-in to social movements, because now social movements actually have the tools of engaging with people and getting new recruits into the movement, and then only on our world do we get the outcomes of that. Our mechanisation was way stronger because we talked about the systematic incentives, the systematic tools of buy-in. How does the environmental movement work to get new people? How does this happen better on our side than theirs? At the point where we do that, our mechanisation should be weighed higher. We win the point and we affect more people. Thank you.
I thank the speakers for their speech, and I invite the voting on side speakers to close the debate.
I think Jesus called and he wants his high moral standard back, because I think when they give you mechanisms as to why there's all of these reasons why people will be held to this massive standard that was very unstrategic, that helped our case. We're going to win by a massive margin. Two things I'm going to walk you through. Firstly, on advice, and secondly, on feeling judged. Firstly, on advice, I'd like to note here, this was literally their entire case. So at the point where we went on this, we win the debate by a massive margin when we went on their own material. The first thing they try and say here is that randoms will come up to you on the street and give you advice. But I think Angam mechanizes to you pretty well that, like, people just mind their own business on the street, right? You just ignore the prick that walks by you and heckles. Like, I think people can recognize when people are just being annoying. The second push they have, and I think this is their main one, is that you will be held accountable for your own actions to your peers. I think the first thing I tell you at first is that a lot of these issues can't be changed, right? Like, you can be held accountable all you want, but your eating disorder won't shift. Angam then tells you that they don't attack the underlying. The attacks don't attack the underlying issues, right? Like, a bully is a bully because, of external reasons, not because, and that isn't going to change when they get called out for it. I think Joni then walks you through how the step stopped is the advice is given, because if you get called out for being a hypocrite, you're not going to magically change your behaviour. You're probably just going to stop giving advice, right? So that means for all of those reasons that your actions don't change. That was the only benefit, pretty much, they were going for in the debate. They don't win that. They literally cannot win the debate. I'd like to note here that even if you bike to work, you might not, have the best LED light bulbs. You might not be vegetarian. And I think that Stella concedes this, right, when she tells you of all the ways that you can, not be perfect at climate change. Which means you were, to feel like you were good enough to give advice, you're perpetually chasing an unattainable standard, which just means no advice is given. If that's the way they want to win the debate, they can't. Their final push is you will get way too much advice. But I think people know this is unproductive, right? So you know that your friend will gain nothing when there's lots of feedback. Or Daniel Mergant is famous for only giving one piece of advice because he knows that's what's helpful. What we show is that it shifts discussion to the wrong focus, because it's now focused on whether you are perfect in every which way. It's likely on our side, it's based on the best outcomes, because friends want what's best for you and what's achievable, and that advice is only given by those that care about you, so they want it to be good. Why is our advice better? Because it's based on a metric of the outcomes for you. Even on their best case, they don't win this clash by a massive margin. So I think when we win on judgment, that means that we can still win. But I think secondly, people could just ignore unproductive advice, which means it's pretty symmetric to unproductive call-outs. On feeling judged, I think you should weight this the highest for two reasons. Firstly, because it affects the most vulnerable people, right? Those that are going through a hard time, that are really rough, right? Like someone with an eating disorder or someone who's disabled is obviously the most vulnerable person. I think secondly, it just affects everyone in society with all the analysis we gave you about why nobody will be able to meet this standard. They try and say they won't attack these sort of the marginalized people, but I think it's an easy way to be defensive. And also a lot of the time people don't know that these people might have an eating disorder, might not know that these people are neurodivergent, because people feel uncomfortable sharing it. We show you, and these are our debate-winning benefits, that people seem malicious when they do this. They seem in denial. They feel like they're not good enough, right? Because celebs now see Lizzo getting dragged through it, and they themselves don't do it. And I think that to note here that advice is pretty marginal clash. We are the only side that prevent these people from feeling awful about themselves, like they are not normal in society, like they are not good enough. I think even on their best case, if we get a marginal change, we can still win, because a slight change to how people feel good about themselves massively changes someone's life. On our best case, we literally stop people from mentally spiraling, feeling terrible about themselves. That wins us the debate.
Another round of nationals. I invite you to cross the floor and shake hands if you wish, and I'll stop the stream.